Hey there, everybody. Brad Geiger here with another episode of Webcomics Confidential. And today we're going to talk about one of those perennial topics in webcomics, and that is reader comments. Should you host them, and what happens when somebody makes a negative comment, and particularly going beyond that, a hateful or a hurtful comment? What do you do then? There's a lot of stuff to get into, so let's dig right in. Should you have reader comments on your site? This is another one of those topics that has changed since webcomics began 17, 18 years ago. In the beginning, it was crucial to have webcomic reader comments on your site, mainly because we were an ad-driven system, and the more that you had conversation going on in your website, the better it was for your page views and therefore your ad views. You wanted stuff to be going on your site. You wanted even controversy on your site because I'm sure you've had the experience, as I know I have, when you get into an online altercation, what do? You keep going back to that site and hitting the refresh button over and over again to see if that other asshole has said something back to you yet. Or maybe that's just me. But this was a good thing in early websites because it drove those page views way up with all those people refreshing their pages to see if the other asshole has said something that they can address yet. And flame wars were great business back in the day. As I've been saying all throughout this series, webcomics business has changed almost 180 degrees from where it was back then. And that impetus to have reader comments on your site is no longer there. But I'm going to go one step beyond the fact that it's no longer a beneficial business move. I'm going to make the argument to you that it is a creativity killer. I will tell you right up front that a couple of years ago, I ditched reader comments on my site. I disenabled the ability for people to post on my site and make comments. And I can tell you, A, it hasn't hurt my traffic in the slightest, at least certainly not to a noticeable way. And B, I've never been happier. And I'll tell you what I mean. I'll tell you, and by the way, because I do a humor comic, I'm going to now start speaking specifically in terms that a humor comic would be relevant in using. I think, in fact, I know everything that I'm talking about is completely applicable to people who are not doing humor. And I know that you have the creativity and the thoughtfulness to extrapolate what I'm talking about to your own particular uses, but you'll have to forgive me. I'm going to start talking about how this relates directly to humor. Please extrapolate it because I think there's stuff here that you can take away even if you're not doing humor. But this is my frame of reference, and this is where I think I can make the most powerful comment is talking directly from my experience. So here's what happens when you're doing a humor comic and you have reader comments enabled. Let's take a hypothetical example. On Monday, you post your comic, and 100 people love it, laugh in front of their computers. They are just spitting coffee, the best case scenario. And of course, those people came to the site. It happened the way it was supposed to happen for them. They got what they wanted and they left. Some of them might take them a moment to type in a little LOL there, but mostly you know that that's not happening. One person didn't get it, and he posts on your website, "I don't get it." By the way, I don't get it is an acceptable, natural, perfectly normal occurrence in humor. It happens in all forms of humor. The only difference between you as a humorist and Chris Rock or George Carlin is that their audience doesn't shout out, "I don't get it," when they drop a joke. And every joke that any comedian ever tells, let's talk just for a second about live comedy. Stand-up is a really good parallel here. Every joke that a stand-up comedian tells hits with a certain percentage of his audience and misses with a certain percentage of his or her audience. The only difference is, like I said, those people who didn't get it don't stand up and say, I don't get it. That's the difference between, and by the way, if that did happen, could you imagine how horrible that performance would turn into? Because at any given joke, let's say 75% of the people, and the percentages change with every joke, but let's say you tell a joke, 75% of the people get it, 25 don't. 90% get the next joke, 10% don't. There are very rare occurrences of humor that everybody in your audience gets. That's because there's a certain logical leap that happens in all forms of humor. And some people, for whatever reason, maybe it's because they don't have the background for it. They don't understand the concept. They don't know what some of the words mean. They cannot make that leap. It happens. It doesn't mean necessarily that you're a horrible writer. It does mean if this happens on a cumulative effect, you need to let that inform your writing and inform the leaps that you are willing to take. But let's go back to my hypothetical. Knowing that there's an I don't get it in every situation, for every joke, for every comic, there's somebody who loves it and somebody who doesn't get it. Monday, 100 people laugh, one person posts on your site, I don't get it. Tuesday, you post a comic. 100 other people, let's say nobody came back from Monday, they're still grabbing their bellies. Oh, I'm still too, my sides hurt too much. Tuesday, 100 different people come. They love the comic. A different person from yesterday's I don't get it, a different person comes in and says, oh, I don't get this one. On Wednesday, the same thing happens. 100 different people come in and love it, and a third person comes in and says, I don't get it. Same thing happens on Thursday. Same thing happens on Friday. What is the cumulative effect on, number one, the newcomer that comes in the following Monday, comes to your site for the first time, and starts reading through the archives? All he sees or all she sees is, I don't get it comments. I don't get it. I don't get it. What is the cumulative effect on the newcomer who sees this on the site? Number one. Number two, as a creator, what is the cumulative effect on you as a creator? I guarantee you it isn't, I just made 500 people laugh last week. It's, I am horrible and I can't write jokes and I suck because 5 people posted I don't get it. The effect that has on your writing is detrimental. And I'll explain why that is. Because it's going to make you make more and more cautious leaps every time you write that next joke. Because you're afraid of that one, I don't get it. You don't realize you made 100 people laugh. All you can focus on is that one person that didn't get it. And that's where the detriment happens. Because some of the best humor requires a pretty solid leap in judgment, a pretty solid leap in logical distance, and you keep closing that gap. The only problem is the easier it is to make that leap, the more unfunny the joke is, and the more cautious choices you make, the more you drain the humor out of it. You can absolutely drain the humor out of your jokes by being too cautious. Sometimes you just gotta let it rip. Sometimes with humor, you've just gotta trust your gut, put it out there, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But by God, you made the leap. I would rather take risks like that than do safe, cautious humor that isn't very funny. All right? Greatest example of this, and I'm sorry, this happens to be a syndicated you know what? I won't even mention the name. All right, Magnanimous Brad. Who'd have thought? But it was syndicated. This happened. There's no getting around this because this was a newspaper. But I actually cut this out because it was a letter to the editor, and it was about around the time that the newspaper in question was running one of these, vote on the comics that you want to see in the comics section. Funny thing, newspaper editors, if you would tell them to put the lead story in tomorrow's paper up to a vote, they would have burnt down the lobby before they would have let that happen. But the comics, we'll leave that up to a vote. And the state of most newspaper comic section is a really good indication of where that decision making left them. But it's another editorial opinion we'll put off to the side. This was one of those vote for your comic things, and this person wrote in and he says about this particular strip, it doesn't always make me laugh, but I always get it. And man, there was something about that, the way this reader summed that up, that totally spoke to what I think good humor writing is all about, or in this case, tepid humor writing is all about as well. I don't always get it, or it isn't always funny, but I always get it. That is the result of timid, non-risk-taking humor writing. They always get it. Not very funny, but I always got it. If you allow these reader comments to sink into your psyche as a writer, you will always talk yourself out of taking risk. And great writing is all about risk taking. By the way, that doesn't mean let's trot all the way over to the other side now. That doesn't mean that you get to take all these wildly outlandish risks, write stuff that nobody understands, and sit back and says, "Well, I did my job." No, you've got to. This is not science. This is not mathematics. 1 + 1 very often equals 4 in writing. And you have to judge it. You have to, this is more like cooking. This is more like recipes. You got to add a little pinch. You got to take a little cup out. Maybe next time not use so much mozzarella sauce or whatever the heck you're doing. Mozzarella sauce, I don't know. But you've got to have a little judgment, okay? And by the way, how do you do this? Honest to goodness, wait a year. I mean, this we're talking long-term thing. The most effective thing that I've ever been able to institute, having done this for a long time, is go back and read my Greystone Inn stuff from 2001, 2002. It's all so old that I forgot what the punchlines are. And I can read it as if I'm a reader. I can read it without spoiling the punchline. It's a surprise to me when I read that stuff. And I can see when you read your old stuff and reread it and really analyze it, you can see where you tend to make mistakes. Where did you risk too much? Where did you risk not enough? Reader comments, you know my attitude on that. I never listen to one reader comment. I try to listen to the scope of comments. If I look at my traffic at all anymore, it's to see trends. I'll try to listen to all the readers. Where am I losing them? Where did my traffic dip? Maybe that's where I'm really losing some people. Listening to one reader, unless that's a reader whose opinion you really trust, you know who this person is, that might be more of a case of a peer, where you go to another cartoonist and say, "Hey, I trust you, really. Read this. Tell me what you really, really think." That is valuable. Listening to an "I don't get it" on your website not only presents a really bad presentation to a newcomer that comes to your site, but it is going to kill your creativity. So, kill all the reader comments and go off and ride into the sunset, right? Wrong. Because going back to that whole idea of using reader comments as an engine, that is still a powerful thing, except we just have to redirect where we're using that energy. No longer is it important to you to use that energy to drive ad sales, or maybe it won't, depending on where you find yourself in your own business. Speaking for myself, no longer was that important for me to drive page views. But on social media, where I'm hoping to spread the word and get not only alert readers that already know about my strip that the new one has gone up, but also to try to, as I'm doing that, get a few people into the boat at the same time. All those reasons that we use social media. Now, reader comments there are very important because, as you know, that's engagement. And the more a post gets engagement, the wider that post gets sent out. This is particularly true on Facebook. Facebook uses its algorithm, and if somebody likes that post, it gives it a little bit of juice. If they comment, that's a little bit more juice. If they share it on their own wall, that's a huge amount of juice. All of the different types of engagement that your post gets helps it get out to more and more people. And then you start to pick up a few newcomers who hadn't heard of you before. Okay? That's where the real action is. But this can't happen without engagement. So I absolutely curtailed reader comments on my site. And anybody that wanted to comment is more than welcome. And I said this overtly at the time, but also it's just a kind of a covert situation. You can't comment here, but you can comment there. So the people that wanted to comment, they ended up going to Facebook and Twitter, and they comment there where it helps me. Now I'm using those comments to drive my social media engine. They want to post stuff over there, they post it all they want. If they post and I don't get it, that's fine. Now it doesn't have that much of a lasting effect because everything in social media kind of filters to the bottom of the goldfish tank. Nobody's going to see it after 5-10 minutes or perhaps after a day or two, right? It doesn't have that lasting effect that it did on my website. Oh, and by the way, here it just has another little tangent because I don't think I'd need to belabor that much at all. I funnel my reader comments to social media where they do me the most good. Here's a weird kind of exception, and to be honest with you, I'm still trying to figure out how I feel about this. There is one place where it is technically social media, but it's also someplace that can have a lasting effect, and that is your Patreon page. And a lot of my comments that used to be on the website are now happening on Patreon. What happened? And for the most part, I've been pretty lucky. Almost all of the comments that I get on my Patreon stuff has been very positive, even in a negative situation. Even if it's like, this isn't quite to my taste. That's about the worst that has been written on my Patreon. For the most part, every now and again, somebody kind of gets a little bit passionate in expressing an opinion. But for the most part, honest to goodness, everything has been very, very polite. It's been fantastic. But now, these are paying members. These are people that are patrons. You've got to handle those comments very differently than you handled reader comments on a free website. However, I will tell you that, and by the way, there's no right or wrong way to do that. I can't tell you how to. I will tell you that when I talk to somebody who's a patron, I absolutely am listening very closely because these are people with literally skin in the game. These are people that have said, I like what you do enough to subscribe to your work through Patreon. When those people talk, I listen very carefully. I take them a little bit extra serious, okay? Because if I don't, I risk running my business aground, right? You got to listen to the people who are paying you money. Those are the people that you'd like to keep happy. That being said, I kind of have an unwritten rule, unless it's kind of an unusual circumstance. I never explain a joke. I never explain an I don't get it response. I don't get it, won't get a response from me generally. And I try to do that in a polite way, but it's really a weird thing for me to explain. I'll tell you what my philosophy is. Having said what I just said about 100 people laugh, one person doesn't. 100 people laugh, one person doesn't. That is the nature of humor. Like I said, even the very pinnacle of comedians, when they tell a joke, a certain number of people in their audience didn't get it. Keeping that in mind, if somebody posts an "I don't get it" comment, particularly when it comes to humor, I don't explain a joke for two reasons. Number one, very simple, very logical, and very pragmatic. There is no instance in which I explain that joke and then it's funny. The mystery is solved. Now again, that whole comment about it's not always funny, but I get it. Well, in that situation, they get it, but it's not funny because I had to explain it. And I took that jump that they were supposed to make, and I made the jump for them. And that is not the same experience as experiencing a joke. So I don't do that. My response generally is, if they push it, is the second half of what I'm going to tell you about this. My philosophy is very simple. If you don't get it, that means I failed you as a writer, as a humorist, as a cartoonist. I failed you on that day with that reader. I failed in that one circumstance. Doesn't mean that I think I'm a failure, because I know a certain number of other people did get it, okay? But if that happened, I failed you on that day, and there is nothing that I can do to make that better other than to try it again tomorrow. And my explaining that joke will not turn that failure into a success. It's a fail. And again, another tangent. You know how I feel about failure. I don't think failure is a negative thing if failure is used as a learning experience. So keep that in mind when I say I failed. It's not the way most people say failed. But in that circumstance, I did not hit the mark. I failed. And I can't turn that failure into a success. All I can do is use it and learn from it to the extent that I think that there's something to learn from there. In some cases, it's just like, you've met some people that just don't get jokes. They're like, shit, I don't get it. There's a whole Twitter feed, I think, dedicated. I think it's called "That's the Joke" or something, where somebody tells a joke, then the other somebody on Twitter explains the joke to them. Great example. Just not too long ago on Facebook, I shared something that it was an Adam West obituary piece, and it had in the phone book, Adam West had under his listing, it said West, Adam, and then instead of a phone number, it said "See Batman," and then Batman, the entry, had "See Wayne Manor," which was like in the Yellow Pages, and the Yellow Pages sent him over to Gotham City in the White Pages, and then that sent him back to Adam West, and it just created this loop around the Yellow Pages, which was a pretty clever gag. One person on Facebook wrote, I don't get it. It just keeps going around in a circle. There's no way to contact Adam West. Yeah, no shit. That's the point. In humor, there will always be that person that takes something and just, for whatever, and by the way, I'm not putting that person down, because there's been plenty of instances when I've been that person and then I'm like, yeah, well, that was a dumb thing to say. We've all been there. But all of that to say, you have to decide how serious to take each one of these "I don't get it's." And when they come through from paying members on Patreon, I think you owe a response to that. But to let it really creep into your creativity, I think you have to be a little bit mindful, a little bit watchful of that. And I think best case scenario is that you keep it at an arm's distance. And again, never get into a situation where you're listening to one reader. Try to get into situations where you're listening to a group of readers. And that goes into more of a meta, maybe a macro thing of looking at things like your page views over the months and your Patreon pledges, stuff like that. The macro view, I think, is much more helpful. Last topic, negative comments. this comes up from time to time, and in today's internet, it's probably as important as it ever was. How do you handle negative comments? The number one question that web cartoonists ask themselves all the time is, what do I do if somebody makes a negative comment on my site? Well, let's define terms here real quick. Are we talking about a negative comment? Are we talking about a nasty comment? A negative comment can be as simple as an "I don't get it." That's a negative comment. Or "Nah, I didn't think this really hit the mark." That's a negative comment. A nasty comment, a hurtful, hateful comment. Obviously, I don't have to go into examples there. You know what that is. That's stuff that goes way over the line. That's stuff that isn't productive in any way, and you can clearly see it's meant to be more hurtful than certainly helpful. And web cartoonists, you see them on Facebook all the time, wringing their hands. Oh, what do I do? What do I do? You delete that fucking comment. And you don't sit around stroking your chin and worrying about whether you are engaging in censorship, because please take a moment to understand what censorship is. Censorship is when you have the power to silence a person completely. Removing their negative, hateful, nasty comment from your website or from your social media feed is not censoring that person. They can go someplace else and make the same comment. You just decided not to have that part of what you're doing. And that is a fair, that's an honest, that's a perfectly smart thing to do. You are under no obligation to host somebody's negative, hateful bullshit. Okay? And that's in any case where you have a delete button, you should feel free to use that delete button. If it's on your site, if it's on Facebook, it's on Twitter, you got to black somebody, you got to mute them, you got to unfriend them, unfollow them, do what you got to do. You are under no obligation. And please, I know your heart's in the right place. You don't want to be dishonest. Don't give the censorship issue a second thought until you have enough power to actually censor someone. Then take a few minutes before you hit a delete button or do something like this. Once you have real power, then you have to be very careful how you use it. Deleting someone's comment on your website is probably the lowest amount of power you can have. It's not very powerful. And if that person wants to go someplace else and make that comment, they can. And you know why? Because you're not censoring them. You're deleting a comment. Those are two different things. If somebody still has the ability to go someplace else and make their comment, then you're not censoring them. All right? But more to the point, by all means, you are under zero obligation to host somebody else's bullshit on a site that you maintain. You put it out of your mind. Go to bed peacefully tonight. Get a full night's sleep knowing that you've done nothing wrong. In fact, you made a smart business decision. All right? So, those are my thoughts on reader comments. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Well, leave your comment. And I'll even tell you what. I never make promises because somebody will post something horrible, but unless you go way over the line, I won't even delete your comment. I'll leave it up. Maybe. This is Brad Geiger for Webcomics Confidential. We'll see you next time.